Hi everyone, this is day 3 of No Perfect Vlogmas, and today we're gonna talk about a different topic. We're changing the pace a bit. We're gonna talk about ego, and because this is a yoga topic, because this is a yoga channel, the topic of ego usually in the spiritual community is seen as very negative. So we're just gonna go into ego, and is it a good thing to have an ego? Is it a bad thing to have an ego? What does it mean when you have no ego? And what does it mean when you have too much ego? So, without too much intro, let's get into it. Yeah, so a lot of us usually, also for those of us that are more into spirituality and maybe follow more spiritual channels, have more spiritual teachings, it's all about the dissolving of the ego, letting go of the ego. The ego is seen as the big bad thing, the big bad wolf, and basically without the ego everything is perfect. So if we could stay in meditation for the whole day, this would mean everything is perfect. But is it really like that? Is it really that the ego is a bad thing? If you think of the ego is actually the personality that we build on top of our spirit since we are coming out of our mother's womb, since we are arriving on this earth. So the ego is the identity that you get from your surroundings, from the day-to-day education that you're receiving, from the day-to-day experiences. The ego is who you identify yourself with. Even if you think in a very broad manner, the ego is just the person that you refer to as me. So in the moment where you refer to yourself as me, myself, you are referring about a separate entity that has, some characteristics. When people are thinking of your name, they also think of those characteristics. They think of your ego mostly. Behind the ego, behind the personality that we have built, behind everything that we acquire and we keep on acquiring, behind that there's more that people sense in us. I believe in any interaction, this spiritual presence is as felt as the ego. But the ego is kind of the interface that helps us talk to each other, helps us to relate to each other, helps us identify each other. What happens with the ego, though, is that the ego is a lot more vulnerable than the spirit is. The spirit has no ups and downs. The spirit is a lot more just being, just existence. It's actually the ego that takes the hit most of the time. The ego goes through down periods of time when our image of ourselves is hurt, we get disappointed, we get depressed, we get out of sync. When something is going up, things are going well, we get confident, sometimes overconfident. What we see many times happening with people that have too much ego is they've been battling a lot, they've been developing a lot, they've built that ego to really resist the environment and really have success in the environment and really conquer the environment. And at one point, the ego gets a bit out of control. Like people that have too much power get that sense that the ego is invincible, like the ego takes over the spirit. And this is where we see things going wrong, where we see wars going on, where we see all of this. It's actually the ego taking over the spirit. But at the same time, we could not exist. We would not exist on this earth without the ego. So anyone that tells you dissolve your ego doesn't really think of you existing, not even on the society, but existing as a separate physical body. It needs to. When you're a separate entity, you need to have a separate ego. There's no option of having zero ego. There's options of being more in your spirit, but this kind of means being deconnected from the society, from the matrix that we built between ourselves to deal with our egos, one with the other. So what's the best approach when talking about ego? The ego hurts us a lot. So if you get overly attached to it and you are not realizing that the ego is a construction and that construction can change at any time, you can fall very, very much to the ground. If you, on the other hand, if you think you're invincible because your life has showed you X, Y, Z, yes, you might be accurate to a certain point, but there's a point where you come to an end. We all come to the same end. And that's where the ego cannot help you anymore. So you need to live a life of balance where you realize that the ego is there to serve you, is there to work for you. The ego has been built in collaboration with those around you. You need to understand though that you are more than your ego. And that spirit can feed the ego, but also can feed a different ego, and also can feed a very different story. So the spirit is always there. The spirit doesn't judge. The spirit doesn't collapse, doesn't go through these fluctuations. The spirit is always there with you. So when you have trouble with your ego, sometimes nature kind of balances out. So sometimes when you're overly confident and overly cocky, you'll see that it goes down, so that life teaches you a lesson to not get too attached to that ego. Or when you're extremely down, you don't know how to get yourself up. The advice, or what I'm realizing also for myself, is to know that I am more than the ego. I am that spirit that feeds the ego. So the spirit can feed wherever, that energy of life can feed whatever story, whatever narrative I choose it to feed. So it doesn't need to be the same old sad story that's built with my ego. I can be detached from my ego for a while, so I gain perspective and I can start to reconstruct it. I cannot live without the ego, but I can transform my ego. I can transform it into a different story. So I think this is where more spiritual people would kind of need to explain that there's no life without ego. It's just us being aware that we're not just that construction. We're just more than that outer construction, and we're the spirit from within that feeds that construction. Yeah, so these were my thoughts for today. If you guys have any topics that you would like to see around Vlogmas, I'm gonna start with some quotes really soon. I just had all these ideas coming through my head, but I'm gonna start going more in depth with some other thinking than just my own. But this was day 3 of No Perfect Vlogmas. Namaste, the light in me sees the light in you. And until next time, bye bye.